This is Camp Countdown, a Toronto Maple Leafs podcast series. I'm your host, Kyle Cushman, and on today's show, we're talking all about newcomer to the Maple Leafs organization, Cedric Pare. Pare was signed by the Leafs back on July 2nd, getting his first NHL contract after 2 seasons with the Colorado Eagles of the AHL. Scored 14 goals, 35 points in 61 games last season in the American League, and is a player that comes to the Leafs, as I mentioned, on his first NHL contract at 25 years old, a 6'4", 212-pound frame, and is an intriguing piece that is kind of on the verge of making that jump from good AHLer to NHL recall option. He gets that first NHL contract with the Maple Leafs, so clearly they see something in him to bring him from a different organization, to bring him in on an NHL contract and kind of see what the development staff can do with him. One of my favorite things, and I think one of the best parts about sports in general, is watching the people who make it who aren't supposed to make it. I'm talking about the late round draft picks, the undrafted players, the people from different places, the people who take unique paths and make it to the show, the people who find success who all the odds and all the numbers say shouldn't find success. It's one of the reasons why I love prospect coverage so much, is seeing these young people grow into their careers and see the people make the NHL that, if you look at the odds, not every first round pick makes the NHL, let alone every second, third, fourth, etc. round draft pick. I love watching those players come up and prove the odds wrong and make it to the NHL. I especially love it when covering leagues like the ECHL, and it's one of the reasons why I was so passionate about making sure that people paid attention to the people who are with the Newfoundland Growlers, paying attention to the late round draft picks, the people that aren't in the limelight, that aren't your top 100 draft picks, that aren't at the top of your prospect lists, the people who are the great stories that become fan favorites because they overcame the odds to make the NHL, in this case, talking about the Maple Leafs. And so over the years, we've seen a handful of success stories in the Maple Leafs organization as they've taken a bigger emphasis on kind of the 3-tiered approach to development, including the ECHL more in their development plans, unlike it's been 10 plus years ago where the ECHL was more of just a league that was kind of its own thing and just affiliated with AHL teams to have that pipeline. And the players that really made it from the ECHL were the complete long shots. Today's ECHL is different, where the players that are assigned there, for the most part, the young players that are assigned there are players that teams at least have some kind of interest in as kind of projects for the development staffs for the various franchises. And that's especially true with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and originally with the Orlando Solar Bears when I first started getting interested in kind of seeing the prospects at all 3 levels, and then eventually with the Newfoundland Growlers, there have been a handful of players that have made it from the ECHL level, have started either on ECHL or AHL contracts, have put in the work with the development staff, and eventually made it to sign NHL contracts and play NHL games. You think of people like Mason Marchment, and of course, most of his success didn't come with the Maple Leafs, but he's one of the big success stories coming from the ECHL and working his way up to a multi-million-dollar contract in the NHL. You think of people on the Leafs currently, like a Bobby McMahon, somebody that was not supposed to even be on the Marlies in the breakout season that he had. He started the season with the Growlers. An injury happened in the lineup, I believe, to Nick Robertson, opens up a spot. McMahon is the first recall after a hot start to the ECHL season, and he flourishes and eventually becomes a top 9 piece on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Players like that are the stories that I love to watch develop. And Cedric Pare, even though he hasn't done it in the Maple Leafs organization, is almost more impressive because of that, because he's bounced around a couple of different teams, a couple of different organizations, and has still found his way from that ECHL contract to an NHL deal and is on the cusp of maybe making an NHL debut. So let's go back to the start for Cedric Pare. He was drafted by the Boston Bruins in 2017 in the 6th round, 173rd overall. In that draft year, he was very much a depth player with the St. John Sea Dogs. Only had 5 goals and 16 points in 64 games that year with a very good St. John team. And going back to 2017, to give some context, this is a draft for the Maple Leafs that, if you look at kind of the late round picks that were around somebody like Cedric Pare, Ryan McGregor was drafted 1 pick before him, 172nd overall by the Maple Leafs. So as a 6th round pick, as a depth piece on a good team in the QMJHL, it is very much one of those swings that a team takes on a projectable frame player who maybe pops when he gets more ice time with that team in the QMJHL, and you hope that they become something that maybe they didn't show as much or get the opportunity to show as much in their draft year. And Pare takes steps over the next couple of seasons while he's still with the Bruins, but ultimately doesn't earn an NHL contract. His draft plus 1 season, he has 37 points in 60 games. He gets traded to the Rimouski Oceanic, and in his final season in the Bruins system, he puts up 49 points in 68 games and a plus 26 rating. So the Bruins opt not to sign him. They don't believe that there's been enough shown or enough progress shown or enough NHL potential shown to sign him to a contract. So he returns to the QMJHL for that final season in 2019-20. He puts up 37 goals, 88 points, a plus 39 rating in 64 games, and gets no offers. Most players in the QMJHL at this point, at the end of their eligibility, have the option of seeing what they can make work in the East Coast League or go the U Sports route. And most of the players in Pare's case go the U Sports route. They play at UNB, they play at McGill, they play at UQTR, one of those teams, and have a very good career in U Sports, maybe play professionally after their U Sports career, but ultimately they make the choice to get their education, take advantage of that at the end of their junior careers, and the NHL dream kind of goes away at that point. Of course, I love U Sports hockey. It's something that I've grown to appreciate over the years being in school at Ryerson and getting to experience so many great athletes in my time covering athletes at that school, doing so currently at York University for the women's hockey program and football program. There are so many great athletes and great sports that are available in U Sports, and there are the people that overcome the odds and do make the NHL coming out of U Sports, but it is very, very few. It is difficult to make that choice to go to U Sports and eventually become an NHLer. Pare doesn't make that choice. He decides to go pro and signs an ECHL contract with the Utah Grizzlies. He doesn't even get an AHL contract with a team that looks to develop him in their system. And maybe part of that is due to the timing, being in 2020, the COVID season, where the AHL was a very weird situation. Players that didn't really become anything put up big numbers in that 2020-21 season in the AHL, where the top players in the AHL were on these kind of ghost rosters on the NHL. AHL teams only played a select few teams. It was a very, very weird system. So maybe that is part of the reason why Pare didn't get an AHL contract, but ultimately he signs an ECHL deal with the Utah Grizzlies. 17 goals, 40 points, 67 games as a rookie in the ECHL, and gets on the radar of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yes, the Maple Leafs were interested in Pare as far back as 2021. He attended the team's development camp and played for the Maple Leafs at their rookie tournament in Traverse City that season. You look back to 2021 and some of the players that he played on a line with at that tournament. You're talking about players like Brett Budgell, Braden Kressler, guys like Ryan Chizowski, Jeremy McKenna, Jordan Frasca, not even the most recent Frasca, the older Frasca that's, I guess, went to Pittsburgh and is now in Nashville. Those are the players that we're talking about. Some guys that signed AHL deals with the Marlies. Even a guy like Braden Kressler that earned an NHL contract from his performance at that tournament and at development camp previous to that as well. Ultimately, he doesn't end up with the Toronto Marlies. He is back in the ECHL and begins the season on a PTO attending camp with the Belleville Senators. He impresses enough to earn a full contract for that season. So in 2020-21, he starts his pro career in the ECHL. He makes the jump to the AHL the next season with the Belleville Senators and only scores 10 points in 41 games in a depth role. He returns to the ECHL the following season. A bitter pill to swallow, but the reality of some of those depth players in the AHL who don't quite get the opportunity to make an impact in the AHL lineup and have to return to the ECHL. He signs with the Wheeling Nailers. Despite signing that ECHL contract, he actually starts the season on the Belleville roster again on a loan, just kind of one of those short-term PTO situations, and returns to Wheeling after a 4-game sample there. Puts up some good numbers with Wheeling in 9 games, has 5 goals and 10 points, and gets a second PTO, this time with the Colorado Eagles, who are in need of players because of a few injuries at both their level and the NHL level, and just kind of need bodies. And going back to his Utah Grizzlies day, there's a connection there with one of the coaches. They call on Cedric Pare, and he arrives with the Colorado Eagles. He never looks back. He earns a full contract after some really solid play early in his PTO, and he eventually signs that full season contract with the Eagles in late January of that season. He ends up putting up a very solid stat line of 8 goals, 21 points in 42 games for a player that has started the season on an ECHL contract and played half of the season on a PTO with the Eagles. In the playoffs, he puts up 4 goals and 6 points in 7 games as well, and he returns to the Eagles for the 23-24 season. Again, he takes another step. 14 goals, 35 points in 61 games, as I mentioned earlier, and that's enough for him to come back to the Maple Leafs, a team that had shown interest in him as far back as 2021, played at the development camp, played for the team at the rookie tournament, and signs his first NHL contract with that team. A really, really cool story for Pare and the Maple Leafs to come back 3-4 years after kind of initial interest is shown. He goes from an ECHLer to a legitimate AHLer, and now we're going to get to see what he can do in training camp, get a few games probably in the preseason, and then probably start the season in the AHL, and then see what goes from there. Given the 6'4" frame, 212-pound body, can play the wing, can play center, can penalty kill, can also pop a little bit on the half wall, on the power play. Very interested to see what his usage is this season with the Marlies. It is very difficult to kind of project an AHL lineup at this point of the season, just because we don't know who's going to clear waivers, who's going to be healthy at the start of the season. There's one thing you always know about teams in the AHL is you start the season going, there's way too many bodies here, and then you get 1 week into the season and it all kind of figures itself out between injuries, recalls, and all that stuff. Right now, it looks like Pare could maybe play a top 6 role on the wing if he impresses enough, or can maybe play a bottom 6 center role, again, depending on how things play out with the Marlies and who is actually available to the team to start the season. As I mentioned, he has that big frame. He has the ability to take faceoffs and play on the wing, and that versatility is going to help him mix and match with a few different people in the Marlies lineup. He showcased a pretty good shot last season, and like I said, improved that goal total from 8 goals in 42 games the year prior to 14 goals in 61 games last season. Is it particularly likely that Pare plays NHL games for the Leafs this season or in the future? Probably not. But that's okay, because he's proven people wrong his entire career to this point, and he's going to do it again in the future. I love seeing players like him break through, and I'm excited to see what we get from him in this first season with the Marlies. Coming from that Colorado Eagles team that had a lot of kind of mixing and matching in their lineup over the past couple of years, to a Marlies team that has a couple of really solid prospects on this roster, and Fraser Minton most likely being on this team, Nick Abruzzese most likely being on this team, Alex Steeves most likely being on this team, Nikita Grabankin almost certainly being on this team, a player like Alex Nylander that he could potentially play and mix and match off of with. Like, there are a lot of intriguing pieces that Pare can fit alongside of because of that versatility, the ability to play center, the ability to play wing, the big body, has a good shot, and kind of mixing around the net front area as well. I'm looking forward to getting to know his game better this season with the Marlies, see how he works with some of the pieces the Marlies have, and I really hope this guy succeeds with the Maple Leafs, because as I've said time and time again on the show already, I love these success stories. And sure, it might not be the Bobby McMahon or Mason Marchment type with the Maple Leafs that start on that AHL contract with the Marlies and work their way up from the ECHL team to the Marlies and eventually break through to the Maple Leafs. But as I said earlier, this is almost more impressive to bounce from a couple of different organizations and a couple of different teams and impress enough along the way to earn your ice time and eventually get that NHL contract from a team that you didn't even play for the past few seasons. It's really cool that Pare was a guy on the Leafs radar 3 years ago at development camp and gets the opportunity to see if he can crack an NHL roster at some point this season now with that team that gave him an opportunity a few years ago. So let's get to my conversation now with head coach of the Colorado Eagles, Aaron Schneekloth, who has coached Pare the past 2 seasons as he's broken out with the Eagles organization. Very excited to be joined by Colorado Eagles head coach Aaron Schneekloth. Aaron, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we're here to chat about Cedric Pare, a player that you've coached for the past couple of seasons now with the Colorado Eagles. He comes to the Marlies after 2 years with your team. What can fans expect when Pare hits the ice after you've seen him for the past couple of years?
You know, Cedric has got a lot of tools and a lot of talent to offer that organization, and if he can take the next step in his development to crack in the NHL roster.
And so you've spent a lot of time, obviously, now in the Colorado Eagles organization, but also a lot of time at the ECHL level, both as a player and a coach. Pare is one of those success stories who've gone from playing in the ECHL on an ECHL contract to now sign a first NHL contract. What kind of person does it take to work from that level to earn an NHL contract?
Well, obviously, a lot of belief in himself, and, he overcame some adversity and showed some resiliency. And, he joined us, I want to say it was November a couple of years ago. We were short on players from injuries and call-ups with the Avalanche, and we got Cedric Pare, I believe, from Wheeling in the ECHL, played a few games with Belleville prior to that. And our other assistant coach at the time, Tim Branham, had coached him in Utah the year before during, I think it was the COVID year. So we had a little bit of background check and some history with Pare, and we brought him in, and he took advantage of an opportunity. Like, he was given, plenty of ice time. I believe he got some opportunity on the power play and had a really good start with us. And he gained a lot of confidence from that early opportunity with us, and then just continued to push and work and grow as a player. And he's a player with big size. He's got good range and length. Obviously has some offensive talent, but has worked really hard on other aspects of his game: defensive play, physical style, adding some grit into his game, and he's more well-rounded now, and that's why I believe he's getting that opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned when he arrived with your team on a PTO, and of course he ended up getting that full season contract and then remaining with your team for another season after that. What were your first impressions when he arrived on the team, of course, in that kind of situation where you guys needed a few players and you called on him from Wheeling?
Yeah, well, his versatility, for one, like, he was a player that came in and could play center for us, and then, had a little bit of time on the wing as well. And then just his offensive upside. I have a vivid memory of him. We were in San Diego, and scored a couple power play goals for us, and when our power play was struggling at the time, so kind of gave us that jolt. And you always like to see guys that have the tools continue to want to work and get better. Like, he wasn't handed anything. He wasn't. He had to work for everything he got that season and the following season, and it's paying off for him.
Yeah, and so he obviously sticks with the team the rest of that season. When you start getting some players back, what was it about Pare's game that made him somebody that you decided to keep around for that entire season rather than sending back after kind of those players that had been out of the lineup returned to the lineup in that first season when he was with your team?
Well, I think part of it was his early success, and obviously, like I mentioned before, his confidence grew, and he provided our team with, a nice element. He had size, he had some good skill, he was putting the puck in the net or creating some offensive chances for us, and that's something our team needed. So for the rest of the year, when we got healthy and players were returned from the Avalanche, we found a way to keep him in the lineup because we felt he deserved it.
Yeah, and so last season you take the step to become a head coach with the Eagles. How did Pare's role change last season with you taking that step to the head coach?
Well, we had a conversation regarding his play the previous year and what our expectations were from him as an organization, and then we wanted to find out what his expectations were of himself, and we worked hand in hand in that. I think we would both say he kind of had a slow start to the start of the season last year, but continued to work hard and regained his confidence and found his game, and it was a big part of our success last season.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier some of the versatility that really made him kind of impress early on with his tenure with the Eagles. How did he kind of impact your roster last year in terms of his versatility, both playing wing and center, but also his impact on special teams?
Yeah, well, we knew we could slot him in some areas on the power play from the previous year, and we tried to create some chemistry because we had some new players, and so he took on a couple different positions that we didn't have him in the year before, and it took him a little bit of time, but he's a guy that gets out there and will work with coaching staff and work on some positioning and how to create some offense in certain areas. And he did a nice job. And then last year we also found him some ice on the penalty kill, and he created some really good chemistry with Riley Tufte on the penalty kill at the end of the year, and generated some good offense when we were shorthanded. So obviously he's a player that understands the game and is willing to learn to get more ice time and to help the team win. And it just shows, what kind of person he is and what kind of player he is. He's got great IQ, and he works hard to get better, and he'll do anything to take on more responsibility.
Over the 2 seasons that he was with your team, what were some of the key areas that you saw his game kind of take the biggest steps?
Well, I think that the biggest one is, I would say, his physical play and his intensity and his tenacity in the corners and around the net. He's a big guy, and so working on some puck protection and then getting to the hard areas. I think that was probably one of the biggest areas that he had some growth in, and when he's playing that style of game, he can be a force out on the ice.
And so looking kind of at what he is now as a player, what do you consider kind of the key standout trait of Pare's game at this point of his development?
Well, his traits are pretty simple. Like, one, he's really good in the face-off circle, so he can be relied on to take some big face-offs, whether that's on the special teams or in either the offensive or defensive zone. He takes a lot of pride in his face-off percentage. And then second is, when he's got the puck on his stick, like I mentioned, he's a big guy with good range. When he's playing with some tenacity, he can be hard to play against, and he can get to good areas with the puck and create some scoring chances. So, my impression of of Cedi is, he's a power forward. He can play 200 feet.
And so as we wrap up the conversation here, the key thing is he's taken that step to become a full-time AHLer. He's earned that NHL contract now. He's on the verge of taking that step to make that NHL debut. What is kind of the next step for Cedric Pare to take to become that player that eventually does make that NHL debut?
Well, I think there's a couple things that, most players in the American Hockey League have to overcome, and it is the consistency factor. Like, you've got to be able to continue to do it for long stretches of time. And Cedric is on that path. He's proven it. He's worked his way from an ECHL player into a full-time American League player, signed his first NHL contract. He's continued to have better off-season working habits and getting stronger and quicker. And now he's got some experience at that level. He's been doing training camp. So now he's just got to continue on that path, continue to work on his consistency and being able to continue to play and have success against top players.
Aaron, thanks for the time today and best of luck this upcoming season.
I appreciate it, Cal. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Aaron for joining the show. That's going to do it for today's edition of Camp Countdown. Tomorrow we'll be back to finish off the week with a bit of a special edition show previewing the Prospect Showdown ahead of 2 games against the Montreal Canadiens featuring all the up-and-coming rookies and prospects. Should be a fun one tomorrow, so be sure to come back to Camp Countdown tomorrow to tune into that one. See you then.